Hey there, upgraders. Roquinia here, and I need to start with a statistic that should fundamentally change how you approach training. Sports and recreational injuries rose by 17% in 2024 alone. That's after a 20% increase in 2021, a 12% increase in 2022, and another surge in 2023. We're not just talking about professional athletes. Exercise and exercise equipment accounted for over 564,000 emergency department visits last year, with the 15 to 24 age group showing the highest injury rates. Here's what this data is telling us. The modern approach to fitness, this no pain, no gain mentality, this constant push for more volume, more intensity, more everything, is breaking people. And the irony? Most of these injuries are completely preventable. Today, we're diving into the injury prevention protocol, and by the end of this episode, you'll understand why your tissues adapt at different speeds, why your warm-up is probably wrong, and how a simple mathematical ratio can predict your injury risk weeks before it happens. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong. In common usage, mobility and flexibility are thrown around interchangeably, but physiologically, they're distinct, and confusing them is a primary driver of injury. Flexibility is the passive ability of soft tissues, muscles, tendons, and ligaments to elongate and stretch. It's a measure of potential range of motion when assisted by an external force. Think of a seated hamstring stretch, where you're pulling your torso toward your legs. Mobility is the joint's ability to move actively through its full range of motion with coordination, stability, and control. It requires healthy, lubricated joints, a relaxed nervous system, and refined neuromuscular control. Here's the critical distinction. You can be flexible, yet immobile. This occurs when you have the passive range to reach a position but lack the active strength or neurological stability to control that position under load. This discrepancy is a primary injury mechanism. If your hips lack mobility during a squat, your lower back compensates by taking on excessive movement, increasing the risk of lumbar strain. You might be flexible enough to touch your toes, but if you can't control that range under a barbell, you're vulnerable. Flexibility training targets tissue tolerance to stretching. Mobility training focuses on active management of joint position to ensure integrity during movement. Both matter, but they're not interchangeable, and training them requires different approaches. Here's where most training programs fail. They treat all tissues as if they adapt at the same rate. They don't. Skeletal muscle is highly vascularized with robust blood supply, allowing it to adapt and heal relatively quickly. Minor muscle strains recover in 2 to 4 weeks, but tendons, which attach muscle to bone, require 4 to 6 weeks for similar remodeling. Ligaments take 10 to 12 weeks due to limited blood supply. And cartilage, being avascular with no blood supply and no nerve supply, is the slowest healing tissue in the body, often requiring more than 12 weeks for any measurable adaptation. This creates what's called an imbalance of capacities. During a hypertrophy block, your muscle strength might increase rapidly, but your tendons' cross-sectional area and material stiffness lag behind. You feel stronger, so you add more weight, but your connective tissues haven't caught up. This is the setup for tendinopathy, ligament tears, and chronic joint pain. The solution is specific loading protocols for connective tissue adaptation. The Berlin method for tendon strengthening recommends 5 sets of 4 repetitive contractions maintained for 3 seconds each, at approximately 90% of isometric maximum. This specific duration and intensity provide the high-magnitude mechanical strain, ideally between 4.5% and 6.5%, required to stimulate collagen synthesis. Your training program must respect the biological clock of your slowest adapting tissues. This is why rushed progressions fail. You're outpacing your connective tissue's ability to keep up. Traditional warm-up protocols centered on static stretching, holding a position for 30 to 90 seconds before activity. The research is definitive. This is counterproductive. Static stretching immediately before explosive or high-intensity activity can decrease sprint times by up to 1.2% and reduce jump height. It temporarily impairs a muscle's ability to produce force, which paradoxically increases joint injury risk. Dynamic stretching, continuous controlled movements like leg swings, walking lunges, and arm circles, enhances power output by as much as 79%. These movements increase blood flow and core temperature while maintaining muscle responsiveness through post-activation potentiation. The impact on injury prevention is quantifiable. Implementing warm-ups that prioritize dynamic stretching and movement-specific drills decreases overall injury risk by 35% and cuts the risk of severe injuries by almost half. Static stretching remains valuable for post-workout recovery and long-term flexibility development, but the pre-activity window must be reserved for dynamic, active preparation. Save your static stretching for after training when you're trying to improve long-term range of motion, not immediately before you need to produce force. One of the most powerful tools in modern injury prevention is the acute to chronic workload ratio, or ACWR. This model predicts injury risk based on the relationship between your recent training load and your long-term average. The calculation is simple. Divide your acute workload, the load performed in the last 7 days, by your chronic workload, the average weekly load over the previous 28 days. The sweet spot is an ACWR between 0.8 and 1.3. Workloads in this range are associated with the lowest relative risk of injury. You're adequately challenged to drive adaptation without overwhelming your recovery capacity. The danger zone is an ACWR above 1.5. When your acute load is 1.5 times your chronic average, your risk of injury more than doubles. Spikes in ACWR have been associated with a 5 to 7 times greater injury rate in professional athletes. Here's the counterintuitive insight. A high chronic workload is actually protective. Athletes who have safely progressed to high chronic workloads possess greater fitness, making them more robust and resilient to sudden spikes. The problem isn't training hard, it's spiking too fast relative to what you've been doing. This is the training injury prevention paradox. Injury prevention doesn't focus on load reduction. It focuses on systematic, gradual building of capacity so you're prepared for the demands you'll face. To safely elevate tissue capacity, practitioners follow the 10% rule, which limits weekly increases in training volume or intensity to no more than 10%. This gradual progression allows time for slower adapting connective tissues to keep pace with muscular improvements. Rapid increases beyond this threshold significantly raise the risk of overuse injuries like stress fractures and tendinopathies. The mechanical stress overwhelms the tissue's ability to maintain homeostasis. Think of it this way. Your muscle might be ready to handle a 20% jump in volume, but your tendons aren't. Your cartilage isn't. When you spike too aggressively, you create micro damage faster than your body can repair it. This accumulates until something gives. The principle of progressive overload still applies. You must gradually increase stress to drive adaptation, but the key word is gradual. The 10% rule isn't conservative. It's biological reality based on the speed at which your connective tissues can remodel. Proactive injury prevention utilizes standardized screening tools to identify biomechanical deficits before they become clinical injuries. The functional movement screen and the Y-balance test are the most validated instruments. The FMS evaluates 7 fundamental movement patterns. Participants with a composite score of 14 or below have 2.74 times higher odds of sustaining an injury compared to those with higher scores. In collegiate athletes, a score of 14 or below, combined with a self-reported history of injury, resulted in a 15-fold increase in injury risk. The Y-balance test assesses single leg stability while reaching in 3 directions. An anterior reach asymmetry greater than 4 centimeters has been associated with significantly increased injury risk, specifically a 2.16 times higher odds ratio. The combination of a low FMS score and a Y-balance asymmetry provides the strongest predictive value with a 3.57 times higher injury odds. These screens don't just identify who's at risk, they identify specific compensations and asymmetries that can be targeted with corrective exercises. Progress happens during recovery, not during training. Deload weeks, scheduled periods of reduced volume and intensity, are essential for managing accumulated fatigue and preventing overtraining syndrome. Continuous heavy lifting without rest leads to elevated cortisol, chronic inflammation, and decreased neuromuscular efficiency. A deload week allows supercompensation, where your nervous system and muscle fibers over-recover to a state of higher capacity than before the training block. Since tendons require at least 48 hours to recover from high-impact activities, a full week of reduced loading ensures any accumulated microtrauma in the collagen matrix is fully repaired. A deload week typically occurs every 4 to 6 weeks and involves reducing training volume or intensity by 30% to 50%. You're not being lazy, you're allowing your slowest adapting tissues to catch up and ensuring your nervous system fully recovers. Here's your homework. First, audit your warm-up. If you're doing static stretching before training, stop. Replace it with 5 to 10 minutes of dynamic movements specific to your workout. Second, track your training volume. Calculate a simple ACWR. If you're suddenly jumping from 3 workouts per week to 6, or doubling your weekly mileage, you're in the danger zone. Pull back and build gradually. Third, implement the 10% rule. Don't increase weekly volume or intensity by more than 10%. This protects your connective tissues. Fourth, schedule deload weeks every 4 to 6 weeks. Reduce volume by 30 to 50% for 1 week. Use active recovery like walking, swimming, or yoga. And finally, if you have access, get screened. An FMS or Y-balance test can identify specific vulnerabilities you can address before they become injuries. Remember, the goal isn't to avoid training hard, it's to build a capacity to train hard consistently for years without breaking down. Injury prevention isn't about being cautious, it's about being strategic. Next week, we're diving into cardiovascular intelligence, Zone 2 training, VO2 max optimization, and why most people are training their hearts completely wrong. Until then, this is Roquinia reminding you that the best training program is the one you can sustain without injury. Train smarter, not just harder. Keep upgrading intelligently.